future of electronic warfare? Well, that's very difficult because that becomes just a theory subject. And my idea of the future is probably as good as your idea of the future, or maybe yours is better. But what I thought I would do is actually talk about how Russia and China are doing. So this comes from the intelligence world, and you probably know I come from the intelligence world as well. So if we then turn around and say, well, they are up to date, and they are, so therefore that's, if we take that as our future, that will probably give you an idea of what we're aiming for. Is that a fair enough starting point? So, I'll make sure I get this working. Do I press this? So, what we're actually going to do now is that this is, I don't want to teach anything today, and I also don't want to actually end up by saying this is the best way to do it, because that's not what this is about. What I want to get to the point is to turn around and say, so what are you going to do about this? Because I understand the next lecturer is going to talk about that. So I just want to provoke this and give you this as a thought, because this is where we are now and where we're going to be tomorrow. So what, and I look to you people to protect me, what are you going to do about it? So that's where we are. So I want to provoke discussion. That's what it's about. This is an interesting point, that even going back to 1810, we then had this gentleman saying 90% war is 90% information. He knew that then. We knew about it in the First World War, we knew about it in the Second World War, we know about it now, etc., etc. But our politicians and our perhaps senior commanders actually don't get it. And so therefore, this is absolutely really important. And if we talk about where cyber is going, where electronic warfare is going, it is about stopping that, destroying it, or something to it, etc. So it reduces its effectiveness. So information warfare, well, this is an interesting point, because what do we call it? So it's defined as a conflict or struggle between two or more groups in information space. Well, that's, of course, some academic way of thinking about it. But if you think about it, that second paragraph says that everything relies on information. Our businesses, our international relations, our military, our general life, etc. We all require information to work. So therefore, if I can impact that information in some way, by damaging it or stopping it going away, I have actually started to either destroy or certainly reduce the effectiveness of life. So that's where we're coming from. So it's worse than dropping bombs or forming some form of kinetic warfare. This is something that can be done remotely, and it can affect our lives all the time. I want to combine it a little bit at the end by saying that information warfare also is electronic warfare, it is cyber warfare, and it is psychological operations. We're going to talk about all those as we go through, because this is what Russia and China are doing today. And you might call it CEMA. It's information warfare, it's CEMA, it's cyber warfare, electronic warfare, etc., etc. I was in the States recently, and I couldn't get anybody in the room to agree what to call it. And I said, but you people are supposed to be leading the world. And they said, yeah, well, that's smoke and mirrors. We don't really know that. But Brigadier General Frost, she's now, well, she was a Major General, now she's a civilian. What she said was that CEMA capabilities is both the protection of the homeland, and it's also the military have to take it out on expeditions as well. So it has to be mobile, it has to be capable of war fighting in the field. So where we think of cyber warfare at the moment, with somebody sitting behind a terminal, that's not exactly where it's going. And CEMA aims to exploit the advantage of our enemies, both in cyberspace and in the electromagnetic spectrum. What I want to do as we go through this is explain that there isn't much difference between the cyberspace and the electromagnetic space, because that's the communication medium. But if we then said, well, okay, then the communication medium is something I'm going to attack, then cyber warfare and electronic warfare become morphed into one. So again, it depends what you want to call it. Stuart Peach said that Britain's competitive edge is completely dependent on the cyberspace and electronic and our communications, and it's Russia that actually understands this, and China understand this, and that's where they're aiming their warfare at the moment. It's cheap, isn't it? They don't have to fly aeroplanes, they don't have to drive tanks anywhere. It's cheap. They can sit down and they can impose this warfare on us. And what are we doing about it? How can we defend ourselves? Britain must do more to protect itself, he goes on to say, and the campaign of propaganda and this hybrid way they're attacking, and they're doing this through fake news. And we've all seen the fake news that's going. I'll give you some examples later on. But that's coming from Russia as well. Not so much China, but coming from Russia. And how do you know it's fake news? We read the newspapers. Well, that's fake news anyway, isn't it? Because that's somebody's idea of what's happening in the world, and they do that from some desk in London, probably. And that's their idea of what happened. Where can we actually get information that we know is not fake? And how do we recognise that something is fake? We'll come back to that because I think it's quite an important point. Sometimes this doesn't work. So, where did it start? DARPA. When I first started in this, DARPANet came up probably in 1978, 79, and it was a net that existed between research institutions and the government. It was a net where we could exchange information. That extended as it went through the late 70s, 80s into industry were included on it as well. So this was a packet switching network where we could all join in. Around about 1990, 91, a chap called Berners-Lee came along and invented HTML and turned around and said, well, this hypertext language, what it then allows us to do is rather than write complex queries, etc., and complex things about getting information, this did it for you. So basically, where we started in the military, we've then gone into this business of HTML, it becomes the internet, it becomes the World Wide Web, etc., etc., and it's grown and grown and grown and grown. And I'll come back to how the network's set up in a moment. But because of this, we end up with a security problem. It's okay whilst you people can push out your communications on dedicated links where you put dedicated encryption, etc., etc., but if you're pushing stuff out onto the internet, and you might turn around and say, well, it's open source, etc., etc. How much open source is it? How much do you communicate that is confidential, but you don't know is confidential? Which is an interesting point, because it then comes back to saying, do we understand security? This leads me, of course, onto the Internet of Things, because we've now come through the 1990s, we've come through the early parts of the 2000s. Now what we're saying is, because, and I have no idea why people want to do this, they want to connect their refrigerator up to their mobile phone. So therefore, or their oven up to their mobile phone, or their central heating system, or their car seats, heating seats, etc. So you could just go on and on and on to where this Internet of Things is going. But what it's doing is just pushing out this network further and further and further. But because it's not fibre anymore, I have to use the electromagnetic spectrum. Now what we've got is the electromagnetic spectrum and the fibre spectrum working together. That's why I'm saying that there's not much difference between electronic warfare and cyber warfare. Actually, you won't know whether it goes over the electromagnetic spectrum. You communicate over your mobile phone, but where does it actually go out onto the ether and come back off the ether again? Stock exchanges. They can't work through fibre. Did you know that? Because the speed of light through fibre is only 0.72 the speed of light. The ticker plants, actually, where they tick these world transfers over, need it faster than that. So therefore, a lot of it is going out of microwave, where the speed of light is about 0.93. So, and I thought about this after a time. I thought, they must be joking, but they aren't. It is electromagnetic spectrum. Interesting enough here is that the Internet of Things, it's 30 billion devices. I reckon it's closer to the 100 billion, by the way. If you think of IPv6, it has 4 billion combinations. Well, we can cope with 4 billion information. GCHQ could actually search through those and find 4 billion is not a lot. But IPv6, so let's say, sorry, 4, IPv6 has got 10 to the power 38 combinations, which is 100 billion, 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 billion combinations. So now what we've got is that the internet has then got all these addresses out on it, and it's that number of addresses. So before we've settled down on the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything has come up. This is actually much more sinister, because I could understand. I didn't really need to protect my coffee machine. I didn't care if somebody switched it on, apart from I lose one set of coffee. But actually, I don't care. But the Internet of Everything is becoming much more serious, because now what we've got is that all of the devices are still connected together. But now I'm putting out a massive, massive, massive amount of information. That's what the Internet of Everything is doing. So therefore, we've now moved ourselves into the era of large data. So we have a communication network which is massive and not always secure, in fact mostly not secure. And as sitting on it, I have the world's data. Does that concern you a little bit? Because that really does become a serious problem if you start to lose it. So therefore, if you think about it, the Internet of Everything has 4 pillars. It's process, data, things, and it builds on the top. So there it is. They're all in red. There's the Internet of Things. And there, going down the outside of that, is data, processes, and people. It's connected through the same networks. And I'll give you some examples of where this is. You have aircraft, that engines on aircraft are reporting that it has a fault whilst it's in flight. And it does that through a system called ACARS. It reports back to Rolls-Royce and said, I have a bearing overheating. And they say, well, when this lands in Singapore, we'll change that bearing, or we'll change the engine, etc., etc. Or this train that you're riding on has had some axle heating, and that reports back to the train operating company or the manufacturer, depends who's looking after the trains, and says, I've got a problem. That data is then building up, etc., all the time. And this data here then becomes what is called the big data that's existing today. Tesco's, they collect all data on you, don't they? Well, they don't on me because I use a car. But I'm not loyal. and so therefore, that they collect information on you, but they not only collect information on you, but they collect it on the buying habits of the country. That's what any of them do. So therefore, they could then work out their supply chain. And their supply chain is totally connected to the big data. And so therefore, when you go into a Tesco's and you buy something, you just swipe your card, etc. And not only because you're checking out through the till, they know what they've sold, but they also know that you buy this type of soap powder. And they also know that you do this. And therefore this data is building up and up and up and up. And all the stores that you go into, it builds up, etc. So you can see where this is going. And it brings together people. It brings together the whole of the economy. Now, you might turn around and say, well, that's okay because that helps the economy. Well, yes, it does, so long as I can't get at that data and manipulate it in some way, or not only manipulate it, but I could falsify it as well, or I could destroy it. Because if I start to destroy it, and it's a supply chain of a very large company, that company will in fact start to feel it down its bottom balance sheet. And Leonardo, its supply chains are so large that that would affect you very quickly indeed. So this is really, really important. So what we've then got is the data. It's the people, the processes, etc. But it's the communications infrastructure that actually connects that lot together. And remember what I said, that it's mostly fibre at the moment. It's becoming electromagnetic, but it's going to become more and more electromagnetic as we move forward. And so therefore, we've now got the networks and the information systems and the data that you guys have got to protect, because it's really quite worrying. And here it is. We've got the internet to employ World Wide Web, Wi-Fi, satellites, cell phones, microwave, UHF, VHF. There's communication backbones. It's happening more and more. So therefore, now we see electronic warfare as we used to know it. It's coming back again, and it's coming. It's putting the better focus on it rather than just saying it's cyber warfare. Just to let you know what happens on the internet per minute. Just the top one there, 18 billion text messages per minute. If my daughter wasn't on there, that would fall by half. That's the communications that's going out on the internet at the moment. And the communications and all the data that exists associated with that. And you've read about Cambridge Analytica. Well, they got the data, of course, from Facebook, but they got it from other places as well. But you could see how they could get hold of that data, manipulate the data, and use it for gains in their particular case, but the downfall of other organisations. So, without me spending any time on their business in the future, it's all of those. Advanced just-in-time order processing. This is one of them. A company will in fact just take one plant in Mexico. You've got Ford's car company. Not only does it order its parts GIT, just in time, the people delivering it, like the wheels, they have to put it on the car themselves. So this is just in time, but it's also processing time as well. So they've invented some, and of course these cars are moving down this production line non-stop. If something didn't arrive in time, the production line has to stop. So that's really quite important. And all our military assets, I know I've picked an American carrier, but ours don't have any aircraft. Which really isn't an aircraft carrier, is it? It's a big ship. But anyway, the American warship here, one of the Nimitz class, all of its aircraft are working with all its data passing, etc. etc. Not one of those aircraft could take off without encryption keys being put in. And each time it takes off, it has to be squirted with 18 encryption keys. The 18 encryption keys are generated in the States, which means they have to come to the carrier and then be held in secret in the carrier and then injected into the aeroplane. If the aeroplane changes its mission, it then has to change its encryption keys whilst it's in the air. So that's where the internet of everything is coming from. So now it's time to just have a look at this. I just wanted to mention this to you because the communication networks, they're hierarchical, they're recursive, they're homogeneous, they're heterogeneous, they're built with no grand design, they have no control, they're loosely coupled, and they're ubiquitous in their operations. They're also scale-free. That's the internet. Nobody controls it. So, if nobody controls it, and sitting on the end of all these bits, I've got 100 billion addresses, or up to 100 billion addresses, etc. You can now start seeing how difficult your job is starting to become. Because that's your playfield, that's the playground. And to add to this complexity, well, you can exist in any of those. Hopefully are not in the criminal state or justice system, but any of those, you exist in them all. Government, state network, university, workplace networks, transport networks, etc. You have information in all of them, which is why I tell everybody, you must lie. Don't put your correct age onto different things or your correct addresses. Make certain that the data doesn't tie up between companies and between databases. The Inland Revenue got on to me 3 years ago and said that you cannot possibly be 140 years old, which I put down as my age. I said, but I'm working on base 15. Because it doesn't ask me to put base 10. And they said that I was being obnoxious and facetious. So, with all that one, you exist there, with all this data, etc. Can you see how easy it is to get at you now? Right, the enemy. Moscow's interest in modernising its EW capabilities, its origins go back to probably 2007, etc. It's a bit further back now, but this is when it started to turn around and say, we are going to modernise our EW. We're going to put it across all the forces. We're going to put EW in each of our regiments. We're going to make certain that this is our key, or information warfare, this is our key method of fighting. So what they've done is that their modernisation capabilities, what they've said is up to 2025, which means that they will benefit greatly from the further advances in EW. We'll have a tiny look at what they've done. But that was what their strategy was. But where it came from, they got a shock of their lives in 1990 with Iraq. They then saw what shock and awe did, and it was all other EW to start with, and they didn't expect anything like that. Then they saw the Balkan crisis in 92 to 95, and it again reinforced what was happening, that they were not up to this level of information warfare. The Iraqi freedom, during the Iraqi freedom 2003 campaign, wasn't a surprise to them, but it was another shock that they were still a long way behind. And in 2007, Gerasimov, who was their Minister of Defense at the time, then said, we're going to change. And if you go back to the speech of President Putin from that particular time, you'll then hear him say, through a translator, that information warfare is going to be our number one priority. EW is going to be our number one priority in 2007. And then what they were doing was copying the US. Russia was integrated its electronic warfare, cyber warfare, psychological operations, etc., into one, where it can then use it effectively against the nation. So again, we'll come back in time in a moment to that. But it's harmonised. As I said, they've harmonised it through its operations. They've harmonised it through where it's effective. I went out to Ukraine to witness this. And you can see that they are putting in attacks on the mobile phones 1 minute. Then they will be putting attacks on, by putting fake messages on there, by saying your officer said go home, there's no more war, etc. So these are text messages arriving in soldiers' phones, smartphones. So basically, all they were saying that there's no point in fighting this anymore, etc. You'll watch your families. And again, it's this psychological operations. So this has been going on in Ukraine, so it's actually been happening. They're also jamming the mobile phone networks, and they can do this through drones. They're also jamming the military networks through their VHF, UHF, SHF jammers. They're jamming the navigation networks, and they are breaking into television networks, etc., etc. So they're doing all of this at the moment in an integrated manner inside Ukraine. Okay, I'm a university professor, I cannot help but maths. But this is a really important point, because here what we've got is C4ISI. If we apply electronic attack, cyber attack and PSYOPs against that, I want to reduce that as much as possible below 1. Do you agree with that? And we can measure this, because we've actually got measurements for it, so we can actually do this. So basically, what we're saying is this is a force multiplier, we want it to be greater than 1. What Russia are doing is to say if we apply all that lot, we can make it less than 1. What you've got to do then is to turn around and add electronic, I've put countermeasures, okay, I'm sorry, it should have been defence. But against that, to reduce that, to make that greater than 1. So that's what you're doing, is are we playing around with the C4 RSI, or are we then going to affect Russia's method of attack? Or do we do both? See, it's putting it into very simple terms in what we have to do. It's generic, as I've said before. GSM, 3G, 4, they're not jamming 4G at the moment, but they're thinking about it. Communication satellite jamming, well, they're doing that as well. And I've proved to the Americans I can jam a satellite, even though it's on spread spectrum. They're certainly doing it against radar, they're doing it, and we've seen them doing it in the Mediterranean against the navigation systems. They've been trying it out and causing ships to go off course. They're only doing it momentarily, but they're proving to the fact it can be done. My own speciality is ELINT, electronic intelligence. They're doing that consistently, but ELINT doesn't only work on the electromagnetic spectrum. I can put in reconnaissance software into somebody's computer, which actually reports back the behaviour of that computer system. So after I've understood what the computer behaviour system is, we can then load down the mother load, which is the stuff that's going to destroy it. But this reconnaissance software is sitting all over the place. So what they're doing is that we think of ELINT on the electromagnetic spectrum, but ELINT can also operate in cyber warfare as well. Another comment from Russia there. I'm not going to go through that, I've just left that there if you like, by the way, I could load here the information from a presentation that was given by a Ukrainian general on all MEWs against them. Would anybody like to see that? Right, I'll send it through to you, and then you distribute it. It's a presentation on all Russian stuff that's in Ukraine at the moment, with pictures, which I think is good. With even pictures from the soldiers' own smartphones and what the messages they're getting from the Russians. You'll have to translate it though, because it's in Ukrainian. Anyway, that's there for you. So, that there is a survey ship. Look at the antennas on it for a start. It's a SIGINT ship. But on the back there, you'll see the deep sea diving bells. And it can then get down quite deeply, because I think it's probably about 6,000 feet that particular underwater vessel can go to. So, that particular ship, Amber, is also sitting off the coast of the America, Georgia, to monitor the submarines going in and out. So she's dual-folded. She's actually looking for submarines. It's doing SIGINT work, and it's also being able to use that underwater capability, because that is the fibre network that exists around the world. $10 trillion worth of world trade relies on just 400 fibres, and those are where they are. See the number coming from the UK to the States. It's the greatest concentration of fibre that goes around the world. So we've got that enormous link going just south of New York, and some of it going into Canada. But that is if you think about it, how many of those cables are in one cable and can we cut them? Of course, this was something that Air Chief Martin Peach was on about a year ago. Because if that's the case, then we don't have to do anything smart. We can cut out communications. And when I was in the Air Force, when the Romans were here, I was asked to look at the diversity of communications between southern England and Scotland. And they said, you don't need to worry about it, David. From Bristol to Birmingham, we've got one link, and then we've got London to Leeds and another link. So we're dual, etc. And I went to the post office and said, "Is that the case?" They said, "Oh no, both of them come from London." So therefore, one link connected the whole of the south military. That is changing. It now goes through oil pipelines. That's what the Russian espionage looks like. You've got what we consider the FSB as GCHQ's equivalent there, etc. And they do a huge amount of SIGINT work, and the GRU being the military side of this, and they're the people that do the Novichok stuff. But here is that their cyber criminals all their cyber work is outsourced, or a lot of it is outsourced. So therefore, they will turn a blind eye to those cyber criminals as long as they're not criminalising in Russia for what they're doing worldwide, so long as they will then provide services to this group of people. So we can then see that this is where we, as trying to play by the book and had our few people doing this, they've got hundreds and thousands of people, in fact, on proxies. This is what they're doing. We know they're doing large-scale distributed denial of service, penetrations into infrastructure, which they're doing as tests, and they've got a huge amount. We know they've got reconnaissance malware out there. Testing of penetration methods in the guise of criminal hacking. So where you see criminal hackers hacking into things, some of it is in fact them doing penetration testing. They're not interested in doing anything, but they're actually trying to get into the system. They're doing all those things, etc. And penetration of telecommunication networks, they're just finding weaknesses. So, winning recruits, how many of them are there? Study of the World Bank says that it boasts more than 1 million software specialists existing inside Russia. It has the potential of becoming the largest IT department. But there's the interesting thing there. Illegal cyber warriors are amongst the most proficient in the world. And I know this because I've had one of them as one of my PhD students. He is a superb hacker. He now works for KPMG, by the way, in penetration testing. So hopefully he's turned to the good side. But nevertheless, he was very good. And the criminal rings, they've recruited nearly 3,000 engineers since 2012. So that's the numbers that seem to be against us. And we know, of course, this is going on. The ISIS orchestrated in St. Louis a massive chemical attack. It didn't happen. The terrorist attack in Sweden, it was fake again. It didn't happen. So where did it come from? Why? It didn't come from ISIS. But why was it put into the system? Well, if you think about it, they're undermining the public's view of the government. This is what they're doing. And so what he's saying is Vladimir Putin's goal is to make us lose our faith in our democratic institutions. At the Cold War, they didn't manage to do that, but they're starting to do it now because of what they're doing here in the cyber world. And we are taught not how to think, but this is why we can be manipulated. We're not taught to what we're taught what to think, not how to think. Do you agree with that? If you think about it, at school, they don't teach children anymore to question. The children come home and they believe what is written. And so therefore, we're now in this world that we're taught what to think. And if we're taught what to think, then science becomes easy. because all I need to do then is just play to your understanding of how you think. So it's on the internet, so it must be true. As a whole gamut of people being brought up, children today, who actually believe the internet, they are going to become adults and then perhaps join the forces, etc., etc. Have they changed, or still are they in this belief of what to think? Just a touch on China. It's the same. Government strategy to coordinate computer network operations, computer network exploitation, electronic warfare, linked to kinetic strikes, etc., to neutralize, degrade an adversary's C4 RSI. That's China's aim, and they have more people working on it than Russia. That's not to say that they're all good, but I'm just saying they have more people working on it than Russia. They facilitate the integrated approach as well, the same as Russia, etc. And SIGINT and information assurance appears to be part of part of their central organisation. If we look at China's espionage in the last few years, that's where they're aiming at, and you can see the majority of that is aimed at the states. But they're trying to get hold of intellectual property. They're trying to get hold of economic details, etc., etc. So it's to enhance the economics of the country. But what happens when they start to push that against the military? I'm not going to go through that, but that's just how China's central intelligence organisation works. And you can follow through these departments and the writings around the side. Go back to the Russians one, and you'll see the same type of organisation there. So, what that's done is to set the scene to say, look, hey, we're going. What we're doing is we're heading towards using the internet for everything we do. And that's all the military as well. We're having the communication networks, which are fibre and electromagnetic, etc. So they're the communication backbones. We're putting all this information onto our systems, and we call it big data, etc. And this data is available to most people. What are we doing about it to protect ourselves when we know what the enemy are doing for us? So, what are we doing? Is that effective? What you're doing, is it effective? That's my question to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Would you be happy to take questions?
As long as I don't have to flick this anymore.
Sorry, questions please. Raise hands. Thank you.
Professor, thank you. I just wanted to ask just a clarifying question really. Looking at the force structures of both Russia and China, what jumped out at me there as a member of the Royal Corps of Signals was those organisations that you're talking about doing this to us are not also attempting to deliver the CIS for that force. So they're not delivering their own end-to-end services whilst simultaneously trying to conduct information warfare on the adversary. We're talking about two different entities, organisations.
Yep.
Have we reached a point now where Royal Signals trying to do both would be tempting to boil the ocean? Should we just focus on service delivery and protecting our own cyber terrain and let higher national structures conduct information warfare? Do you think we may be losing that ground and to try and do both with such a small force?
It's a very good question. I don't think they are stovepiped, both Russia and China, and we know that, from their defence and their attack, so they are stovepiped. I do believe that the Russians are better at protecting themselves than the Chinese, but coming back to the question you posed, is that are we trying to do too much? Well, GCHQ are supposed to protect this country, and that's their remit to do so. Most of the work they do is in the cyber or the fibre domain, etc., etc. They're not necessarily focused on the electromagnetic. but are there enough of them? And then they don't focus on the military. That's the big thing. They're focused on protecting infrastructure, protecting our economics, etc. You guys are facing the other half to that, because the military is a huge part of this. So I don't understand at the moment, and I've tried to understand how you're structured to do that. It strikes me is that if I could be honest, I went to America 2 weeks ago, and it was the biggest load of smoke and mirrors I've ever heard. They actually don't do it themselves, and they're putting a lot of money into it, but they don't actually do it. And so I just don't know if just numbers, whether you would take that on as a undertaking. Because if we don't, we've lost. Going back to the 90% bit from what we've done. Yes.
Further to that point, Israel and Switzerland have what's known as systems of time. And actually, correct me if I'm wrong in this statement, but I believe that they've got a complete database almost of people who leave school. They know their capabilities, they follow them through their working lives, and literally, if there is a problem, they've got a specialist, they just tap in, and then somebody goes along, taps them on the shoulder, and says, would you mind taking a sabbatical for 5 weeks, and they take that to do whatever, and to go on with it. Now, what I'm thinking is, have we reached that stage yet? Are you going to make a political case? Because it's going to be political if we start mobilising civilians. Have we reached that stage? Is this the essence of your talk?
I've been to Israel, but they're not under the same level of attack that we are. And I was in Switzerland just a few weeks ago, and they are certainly not under the same level. So, on a scale basis, yes, I think they can handle it through what I would call ad hoc or proxy, part-time or whatever they want to call it, help. But Israel's better than that. Israel, of course, these people are permanently on call, so and they're very well trained. But they're not at the same level as Europe and the US. And within Europe, the UK is the highest target of the Russians. So I just don't think we can scale. But I agree with your suggestion. I think that we do need to bring in. But the army, I think, are doing this. You've got reservists, haven't you? And it may be that that's the key thing in the future, where we use a lot more reservists. But it's basically getting the people with the skills. I was hacking with Dimitri. It took me a day to write a hack program, a whole day, and it didn't work. He did it in 5 minutes, and it worked first time. So there's a difference in skill level. And I think that that's I do well with that.
It's interesting what you said, that last point about skill levels. There's a fascinating book reviewed, especially for RSI. It's called More in 140 Characters, and it explains just some of the things we speak about. But the interesting thing there is that there are some successes in this film.
Yes.
A chap who, for instance, was an online gamer and developed all sorts of instincts and skills such as you mentioned, was able to recruit a few other like-minded souls. And together they traced exactly who it was who shot down that Malaysian Airlines aircraft, 51st Brigade from Brooks. They tracked the launcher all the way, using dash cams and all sorts of things. So sometimes I think it can be turned against them if we get the right people.
You're right, but it's one instance. and I don't know how many, some of you here would know how many attacks the UK are facing per day, but it's thousands. But what we've got to do is perhaps get them in the reserves, but the key thing is that the regular people like yourselves are going to be the backbone of this, and you're the people that are actually going to have to say, well, how do we actually fight it? Do I do it behind a terminal? Do I do it in the field? Etc. And do you fight it by just hitting who's cyber attacking you, or do you actually become purely vindictive and hit them all? Because that's the other way of thinking about it, isn't it? I don't know whether I should say this amongst you, but I was cyber attacked a couple of years ago at work, and I was furious about it. So Dimitri wrote a piece of software. We put it into a Excel program and sent it back to him saying, "Dear sir, I'm not quite certain which is my bank number and which is my account number, but here's the spreadsheet that I use to get the information. Here in the spreadsheet." And I was told that that's against the law because it's vigilantism.
Protection.
Hmm?
Protection.
Any more? Alpha?
How does Russia run information campaigns, and then how does it coordinate the activities of the terrorists?
That's a very good question. You could find this out to some degree. If you look back in 2008, you'll look at the Estonia campaign when they were attacking there, and you can see how they got it completely wrong. They were attacking in an uncoordinated manner. It certainly affected some of the Estonian businesses, etc., but it didn't really affect the country. When they did it in Georgia, I think a year later, they then tried to link that with their kinetic forces. So they then had cyber attacks, EW attacks, and kinetic attacks at the same time. They completely failed in the first instance because they lost a number of aircraft because they weren't coordinated. So they weren't planned. In Ukraine, what they've done is quite different. They've now planned it in a method where they then have different cyber attack or EW attacks phased on different times at the same time before having some form of kinetic attack. I'm not a strategist, so you guys are. So you really should actually have a look at those and see